Great. Senior Constable, before you left the Yunamu police station with the IRT at around 7:06 p.m, was there a discussion as to which of your accoutrements you would take? Which of the, for example, weapons you had with you would take?
Not that I can recall.
You left the station carrying the long arm firearm which is known as an AR-15, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Have you ever in the course of your duties discharged that weapon?
Only in training.
Why did you take with you an AR-15 on this job which you thought involved the arrest of Kumanjayi?
I think I probably, looking at it now, I would have made an assumption that nobody else had an AR-15 with them at that particular time we were leaving. So I made the decision to take my AR-15, which for IRT is a primary weapon as opposed to taking your Glock, in the event of possibility of something extraordinary occurring where we may not have had, may have needed it, but may not have had it.
Do you think, looking back on it, that you took the AR-15 because it was a weapon often carried by the IRT, rather than thinking about what was actually going to be of most assistance in the arrest of Kumanjayi?
Potentially both, to be fair. Yes, I can understand both of those comments.
Okay, well, I'll just ask you an open question. The primary mission was to arrest Kumanjayi,
yes.
in your mind.
Yes.
How did you think that it would have been of assistance I would draw that. Were you thinking that it would have been of assistance to the four of you in that job?
Not to do a hands-on arrest, no. But it certainly could, in the event if the situation became critical for whatever purpose, then at least I was comfortable in the fact that we had all of our relevant accoutrements to deal with any possible situation that may arise.
What were the possible situations in your mind that may arise that would have justified, I would draw that justified carrying the AR-15?
The presentation of a firearm, the presentation of any weapons that may cover distance further than a handheld weapon. So something to that effect as an option.
When you had been out on that IRT job in Borroloola, did you
Yes.
carry an AR-15 in the community?
I believe initially, yes.
Was that for the purpose of arresting somebody?
I don't think the AR-15 was for the purpose of arresting somebody, no.
But I'm just trying to help her on it to understand. I appreciate the IRT doesn't exist anymore in the
Yes.
form, but was it part of the general tactics of the IRT to carry an AR-15 if you were called out to a job?
Yes, generally, Your Honour. It's to have something, like I say, depending on the risk of the situation or the fact that it may elevate to something that may certainly be critical, then we at least would have the necessary equipment to potentially deal with it if need be.
In this case, you've told us there was no specific risk assessment that was done in relation to this job, though, was there?
Correct.
So I'm going to suggest to you that on reading the material, there wasn't a whole lot of specific thought that went into who would carry what before you went out to arrest Kumanjayi. Is that fair?
Correct.
If you were asked to assist with a hands-on arrest with Kumanjayi, an AR-15 would not have helped you. Do you agree?
No, not for a hands-on, no. It would be an encumbrance.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's because you can't easily put it down and leave it unattended while you deal with a hands-on arrest, can you?
No, although it is a weapon that can be slung, so you can still utilise slinging it to the rear if you need to go hands-on.
We heard from First Class Constable Ebel, though, that there are particular slings that you wear, and you weren't wearing a sling on that day that would have assisted you to put the AR-15 safely and comfortably behind you. Is that right?
No, I believe the sling that I had, from memory, would have been fine to sling to the rear if need be.
Would you have felt then, though, that it was accessible potentially to members of the public if you were involved in some sort of melee where you were doing a hands-on arrest where the gun was on a sling behind you?
If for somebody to come up from behind to
Yes.
access the firearm?
Yes.
Potentially, but they'd probably have an issue trying to take that because it's slung to my body.
Did you have a taser on you when you went
Yes.
out to arrest Kumanjayi?
Yes.
And did you carry a baton?
Yes.
And did you have your vest on that was protective against?
No, I don't believe I had my my ELPV vest.
Did you have any discussion with the other IRT members as to who would who would attempt a hands-on arrest if Kumanjayi was located?
No.
Can I suggest to you, I'll come to some points about the benefit of a plan, but one benefit of discussing with the other members is that you can work out what tactical options you each carry as part of a team more effectively if there's a discussion about it beforehand.
So I can understand what you're saying, yes.
I'll come back to that shortly. Can I suggest to you that the open carry of an AR-15, in terms of limiting your options, was something that you reflected on the 13th of November? Because when you're asked about what happened after Kumanjayi was shot, you say the situation after that didn't require me to go in. And you said, from memory, this is at page 43, from memory, because I was conscious of the fact that they were already in there and containing the guy, so I didn't require me to go in. Plus I was carrying a long arm rifle, so I didn't want to get into a wrestle with a rifle and they looked like they'd contained the guy. What did you mean by that in terms of not wanting to get into a wrestle with somebody when you had a rifle around you?
Unless it's absolutely necessary, then there was no point in me going in with a rear slung AR-15 on my back. Yeah.
But is there also a danger to going in with a rear strung?
There's potential, possibly. Yeah.
I'm just borrowing your words
as
to why you didn't want to do it. So just if you could just explain.
I think I explained that they were in the process of containing Kumanjayi.
Yes, you did.
Yeah.
And just to remind you, what you say is, plus I didn't want to go in.
Yes.
Plus I was carrying a long arm rifle, so I didn't want to get into a wrestle with a rifle.
Yes.
What are the dangers of getting into a wrestle with a rifle?
It's just an encumbrance between two people, I would assume. I've never been involved in a wrestle with someone. It's more of a distance thing. However, I wouldn't want to get into any type of physical altercation if I'm in possession of a rifle.
Is there a possibility that your rifle can be discharged by somebody else engaged in the wrestle?
There's a possibility if somebody understands firearms, and yeah.
Can I suggest to you that there's another reason, and I'll just be clear, Senior Constable Hawkins, I'm asking you to reflect on this so that we can learn the lessons of this tragedy.
Yes.
I'm going to suggest to you that there's another reason why an AR-15 shouldn't have been carried in these circumstances when the primary focus was the arrest of Kumanjayi, and that is that it is intimidating for members of the community in a way that was unnecessary given the limited risk that was posed by Kumanjayi at that time.
Yes, I understand what you're saying, yes.
Do you agree with me, reflecting on it?
I can understand that people would be surprised at the sight of a police officer carrying an AR-15, yes.
And you know, don't you, that Elizabeth Snape, who was there with her babies, had a discussion with Constable Eberl, which he's given evidence about, and he's apologised and said it was not professional and he wasn't trying to be offensive. But she says to him, I'm wondering why he's got a gun, and she points at you. And she says, it looks like he's aimed to shoot it at somebody. You can accept, don't you, that if members of the community aren't used to seeing an AR-15 long-arm rifle being carried around.
Yes.
You don't want them to become accustomed to seeing those sorts of rifles being carried in the community. You accept, don't they, that for somebody who's not a police officer, they're pretty intimidating looking.
Yes.
And you don't want to create an environment where the community are intimidated or fearful of police.
No, certainly not.
You want to create a trusting environment between community and police.
Yes.
So for that reason, unless it's absolutely necessary because of unrest or something else in the community, it's a good idea not to carry them in the community.
In hindsight, yes, I understand that.
I'm going to ask you now about what happened, not at the first house you went to, which we have clearly understood in your evidence, but the second house, the house where Kumanjayi was ultimately located, was 511.
Yes.
When you went to that house, was there any discussion beforehand as to the particular formation of the IRT outside the house?
I think from memory, it was words may have been spoken to the effect of the same as what we had just done at the previous house, to the back, which is obviously where I went.
So there'd be a repeat, effectively, of the manoeuvre that from
More or
the
less,
first
yes.
house.
Yes.
Was there any discussion that Constable Rolfe would take the lead or another officer?
I can't recall that at all, but I don't think so.
Was there any discussion as to what your specific role would be outside that house?
I think it was once again just like I say, a few words would have been mentioned. It's the same as what we had done at previous house, 577.
You have since watched the body-worn video from yourself and others, is that right?
I have once or twice, but not recently.
Do we take it that apart from what is captured on the body-worn video footage, there was no other discussion?
Not really, no.
In relation to that particular entry, House 511, did you observe Constable Ebel and Constable Rolfe enter into the house?
No, I didn't.
Why is that? Where were you positioned?
I was positioned at the rear door of the house, which was well out of sight.
You understand, don't you, that we have in evidence your interview and the transcript of it from when you very first reflected on this at 3 a.m. on the 10th of November?
Yes.
I'm going to ask that be played to you now, just that portion of it, so that I don't have to ask you again, Senior Constable, about it. But you understand there's people listening from the community.
Yes.
I want to give a warning about this because it's distressing. It covers the time Kumanjayi passed away. But the reason I'm playing it is because we are getting some feedback from some members of the community. They really want to try and understand what happened in the lead up to Kumanjayi's tragic death. So I'll just play this interview from Senior Constable. He was outside the house. He saw some part of what took place in Kumanjayi being shot. So I'll ask Beck to play that now.
rested up against, or held either point blank or up against the mid-region of the male that they were fighting with, they were wrestling with, and shot him twice. They were the two gunshots that I were 100% sure were gunshots. I believe, in hindsight now, that the first noise that I heard, which I thought was furniture falling down, was possibly the first gunshot.
That sentence finishes, which I thought was, I believe in hindsight now that the first noise that I heard, which I thought was furniture falling down, was possibly the first gunshot. And Senior Constable Hawkins, we've all been following along with our transcript, and I think it's louder on the live stream for people to hear. Had you ever been involved in a situation where a member of the community was shot by a police colleague?
No.
Do you remember now what that experience was like for you as a police officer?
Very shocking, yes.
Is that anything that you thought might possibly happen when you set out from Yunamu Police Station at 7:06?
No.
You go on in that interview to say that people were coming out of nowhere. It was your perception. This is at least at 3 o'clock in the morning. You demanded they stay back and move back, and I told the women that I recall women holding babies saying, get them out of here, take them away. People were saying, you've shot him, etc. You can understand, can't you, the enormous shock that the community felt having heard those gunshots.
Yes.
And then on top of that, that was somebody who was a loved member of the community.
Yes.
Must have been extremely distressing for those members.
Very, very.
You are asked about your main concerns in your second interview, and you say officer safety, everybody's safety. You go on to say there are two things. A male had just been shot in front of my eyes, and I knew that he was shot more than once, so he needed immediate first aid. In terms of the first aid, Your Honour has an understanding from the body-worn video footage and CCTV footage of first aid for Kumanjayi. When was that first commenced, first aid?
I believe it occurred the moment that the two officers in Kumanjayi were placed in the back of the vehicle.
What was your role in terms of moving from house 511 through to the station?
I drove the vehicle, so I told them, I think I recall saying hop in the back and start first aid, or words to that effect, and drove back.
At the station, I'm not going to go through much of this with you, others may, but you seized Constable Rolfe's firearm, is that right?
Yes.
Why did you do that?
Just to preserve the evidence. I was aware of it as a very critical incident. With everything happening, I thought at that particular time, if I can seize that firearm, just to preserve that for a pending investigation that may occur.
Well, you knew, didn't you, that this, in circumstances where a member of the community had been shot, there would have to be a full and thorough investigation in relation to what had occurred?
I think where anybody is shot by police, regardless, yes.
Had you at any time prior to this incident read the General Operations Order in relation to deaths in custody?
No.
Did you know that one existed?
I believe there was one of sorts that did exist, yes.
But did you receive any training in relation to that document when you started work in Northern Territory Police?
No, we have a lot of general orders that we obviously don't cover, and obviously I didn't get to read. That was one of them.
On that night of the 9th of November, or in the morning on the 10th, did anybody mention to you, look, there is in existence a general order covering deaths in custody and we need to make sure that we go through the steps?
Not to my knowledge.
So you were just relying on your general understanding of police investigations in making sure that Constable Rolfe's firearm was seized?
Yes.
You also note in one of your interviews that Constable Rolfe had a noticeably sore shoulder, had a hole in his shirt, and he told you that that's where I think I got stabbed. You had a look, you could see a puncture wound in his left shoulder, so he took a shirt off his shirt off, and you also then seized and exhibited that shirt. Is that right?
Yes, I took photos of, I think possibly before and after the wound, and then I seized the shirt.
When you say before and after, what do you mean by that?
Prior to him taking his shirt off, I think. I may be wrong. I'm trying to think back there.
You had a mind at that time, didn't you, to preserving the available evidence for an investigation, which would take
At least something, yes.
Did you at any time have in mind that the officers should be separated after, I don't mean before first aid was administered, because that had to be your top priority, didn't it?
Yes.
After Kumanjayi had tragically passed away, did you give any thought to the need to separate officers so that they couldn't contaminate each other's account?
I don't think it was possible, just due to the low numbers that we had there and the evolving situation. So I don't know if that thought crossed my mind, to be fair, because we were only a small number of people.
When did you leave Yuendamu to head back to Alice Springs?
I think I caught a police flight back when the nurses returned the next day.
That was on the 10th of November?
The following afternoon, yes.
By nurses returning, who do you mean by that?
The two nurses that visited to assist, I think one was injured. So when we left, they left with us at the same time on a flight.
That's Nurse Walcott and Nurse Sanker, is that right?
I think, if that's their names, yes.
The two nurses who'd come in from Yuendamu?
Yes.
At any time prior to you leaving to go back to Alice Springs, do you recall any conversation you had with any of the 4 IRT members about how Kumanjayi had died?
I think at one stage, Adam and I we were outside the back of the station. It was still quite a volatile feeling to the environment. There were rocks that were getting thrown. And I think we were just coming to terms with, did this actually happen? Are you okay? What on earth happened? And it was a brief, reality. I can't remember what was said, but that was what I'm remembering back now. It was coming to realisation with what actually happened.
Do you think you were still in shock on the night, for the whole of the night of the
Yes.
night?
Yes.
And what about the next day?
I think I was in shock for several weeks. Yeah.
Did you get much sleep in the few
No.
nights after?
No.
I'm going to ask you now, with the benefit of all the reflection you've done since this tragedy, to think back about things that we might learn from it. In your first interview at page 8, accepting what you've just said about being in shock, you say this: from my view, you're asked if there's anything else you want to say, and you say, from my view, it appeared to be a textbook inquiry. It was low-key. We were in full police uniform. All of us were in police uniform. So we stood out as police, even though we were on an IRT deployment. I believe we should have been in the full IRT equipment and kit. That probably would have stood us out different from police. Putting the uniform issue to one side, your first line about that is, it appeared to be a textbook inquiry. Did you mean to suggest that from your perspective at that time everything had gone according to plan?
Yeah, I don't think it was any different to the general duties making an inquiry to locate someone at an address. If you have enough members to be able to cover the back, couldn't contain, somebody does a door knock to see if that person's at the address. Straightforward, I guess.
In terms of what you believed when you were setting out to arrest Kumanjayi at 7:06 p.m. was that it would be a straightforward arrest?
Yes.
Have you read the report that Commander Proctor has written for the assistance of Her Honour about this?
No, I haven't.
Is there a reason why you haven't read the report that's prepared by Commander Proctor?
I've never been made aware of it.
Would you like to read the 170-page report that Commander Proctor's written with his assessment of what the lessons are?
Oh, look, I'd love to, providing I don't have to read it between now and the end of giving my evidence. Yeah.
I'm definitely not going to ask you to
Absolutely.
do that.
Yes.
But you want to reflect and learn from this tragic event, don't you?
Yes.
You're now in a situation where you're teaching other police.
Yes.
you want to understand if anybody's suggesting that it should have been done differently, don't you?
Yes, I'd
You
like
don't
to
feel
understand.
defensive about that. You want to hear what they have to say.
Yes,
And it can be incorporated in your teachings to others.
absolutely.
I'm going to suggest to you that there's this to learn, that Sergeant McCormack and Sergeant Frost drafted a written operations order with an arrest plan that was approved by Superintendent Nobbs. That should have been the discussion, the subject of understanding by all members of the IRT. That's clear, isn't it?
Yes.
Superintendent Nobbs gave evidence that what he would have expected is a briefing to take place on the arrest plan with any further detailed discussions as to how the arrest was going to be effected at Yuendamu. You'd agree with that, wouldn't you?
Yes.
At the time of the IRT deployment to arrest, which you thought was with the sole purpose of arresting Kumanjayi, police knew of the axe incident, as it's been termed, from the 6th of November.
Yes.
And police knew that there were alerts on Promise that he may well have presented a risk to police, if I can summarise them like that.
Police in general knew, or management knew.
Are you familiar with the Promise system as it was then?
Yes, I'm a bit rusty now because I don't use it, but yes.
Have you ever had a look at the Promise alert that was put on for Kumanjayi?
No.
I'll just read it to you. So the Promise alert said on the 6th of November, following the axe incident, can be arrested, assault police, and another alert, may be violent towards police. I mean, that was clear from the axe incident, wasn't it?
Yes, if that's been put on from that
Yes.
incident, yes, that would be.
But that accords, I'm not being critical of, I'm not trying to demonise Kumanjayi. It's evident from what happened on the 6th of November
Yes.
that in those circumstances, when he was faced with police in the room attempting to arrest him, he picked up an axe and ran
Yes.
towards. When you looked at that, you could understand why that was frightening for police in the circumstances.
Yes.
And it was very fortunate that in those circumstances, neither police nor Kumanjayi was injured.
Absolutely.
So it would have been obvious to you from watching the 6th of November video that arresting Kumanjayi in similar circumstances where police entered a house and he had an opportunity to grab a weapon presented a danger to police.
I think. Sorry, can you say that one more
Sure.
time?
From watching the video of the 6th of November
Yes.
and knowing what had happened on that day, it would have been evident to you that if police entered a house and found Kumanjayi and he had an opportunity to grab a weapon, police may well be in danger.
Yes.
And
If he had
Kumanjayi
the opportunity, absolutely, yes.
and in the same circumstances, Kumanjayi might be in danger of being shot if he presented a weapon.
Yes.
And I'm going to suggest to you that that presented a particular risk, an elevated risk, in relation to the arrest of Kumanjayi than it would arresting somebody where you don't know that background.
Yeah, I guess it's very common for a lot of people in the central desert region that have those alerts, though. So it's not uncommon.
Well, I'll just stick with,
Yeah,
the
sure.
body-worn
But in
video.
relation to this, yes.
That particular incident where you were being sent out
Yes.
as the IRT tactical squad to effect an arrest
Yes.
should have involved a higher level of planning for the arrest.
I think so. Looking,
And it should have involved a risk assessment, shouldn't it?
yes.
And it should have involved discussion of a particular arrest plan, particularly knowing now that one had been devised and approved by superintendent.
Yes, knowing now.
And that if there was better planning to accommodate that risk, that might have minimised the need for the use of force, looking at it in hindsight?
That's a hard one to answer, actually. Yeah.
I'm not suggesting to you that we would know for certain
Yeah.
that nobody would have been...
But I think any planning and risk assessments will certainly go towards being advantageous of reducing the opportunity to use of force, or mitigate or minimising and avoiding use of force. Yes.
And that's what you tell us takes place in New Zealand in relation to an IRT equivalent squad being sent out to detain somebody. I expect that there will be some evidence before Her Honour that Alice Springs should have a second tier TRG or some access to some resources of a highly trained squad that would be able to assist for different strategic arrests and unrest. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I do, yes.
It's essential, isn't it, that if you are going to have an IRT team equipped in that way, they need to be well disciplined.
Yes.
Highly professional.
Yes.
And to ensure that before detaining or attempting to detain somebody where the risk is elevated, a proper plan is done.
Yes, I think so.
After you came back into Alice Springs, we understand that a barbecue took place at Constable Rolfe's house on the 11th of November in the evening. Did you attend that barbecue?
I attended the address. I didn't stay for the barbecue, so I don't know if the barbecue.
Yes, sorry, that's my clumsy question. You attended Constable Rolfe's address in Alice Springs. Yes. How did you come to get an invite to that?
I received a text the day before from Senior Constable McCormack stipulating or saying something along the lines of there was to be an IRT debrief, I should say, the following day in the IRT office, which is at the police station, at about 4:30.
Did you understand that Constable Rolfe would be invited as well as the rest of the IRT to that debrief?
I actually did, yes.
Did you know what the purpose of that debrief was?
I think it was to, from my thoughts, it would have been to, first and foremost, check on everybody's welfare. Secondly, to more than likely go over general orders that may have needed to have been covered off since the incident to be able to ensure that, process was continued.
Ultimately, that debriefing in the station didn't occur? Is that
No,
right?
it didn't occur.
How was it called off?
I think I received another text the following day, probably a couple of hours before that time, saying that change of address, now it's at Zach Rolfe's house, and the address was given to me.
And did Sergeant McCormack send you that text message?
Yes.
And so you went to Constable Rolfe's house.
Yes.
Do you know how long you stayed for that night?
I actually thought I was only there for about 15 minutes, but I left with Constable Ebel, who left, and I had no sleep. So I was a little bit of a zombie, to be fair. I just sat there and I think I had a stubby of beer, maybe two. And then I realised it's not a debrief. And I think Adam at some stage said it's time to go. Well, he was going to go, and I said, can I get a lift home with you? And he did.
If it wasn't a debrief, what was it?
It turned out, from what I can recall, it was some sort of welfare check, I guess. It wasn't just IRT. It was, I think, members, obviously, from his patrol group, possibly, or his social group.
Who do you remember now being there?
Excuse me. When I arrived, obviously Zach Rolfe was there. Adam Ebel turned up a little bit after me, I think. I think Shane McCormack was there.
Evan Kelly?
Yes, Evan Kelly. I recall Evan Kelly being there. I think Sorry, I can't think.
I'll just suggest them to you
Sure.
and see if you remember.
Yes, absolutely.
And if you don't remember, please just tell us. Officer Hansen, do you remember him being there?
Yes, I think he was there.
Kirstenfeld?
Yeah, I think Kirstenfeld was there.
Bonnie or Bonnie?
Brianna Bonnie.
Yes.
Yeah, I think obviously these people weren't there when I first arrived. I don't think the majority of them might have turned up a bit later. I think Brianna Bonnie turned up not long before we left.
Henderson?
She was there. Paul Henderson, yes.
At any time while you were there, do you recall a phone call being made to another officer and a discussion with him?
No.
While you were there, was there a discussion as to the events of the 9th of November?
I don't remember it. I think I just remember sitting on a couch or in a chair, a soft chair, just sitting there looking into my bottle and thinking, I hadn't slept for pretty much since the incident, and it wasn't my desire to be there, and I was either going to give my wife a call to pick me up or get a lift home with somebody, and it turned out that Adam gave me a lift home.
Did it occur to you when you were there that it was the wrong thing to do to be socialising at that time, given the events of the 9th of November? I don't mean in terms of, I'm not making a moral judgment about socialising, about in circumstances where there may well be a discussion as to what had taken place previously.
I think looking back, it's probably not the wisest of things to do. I think, looking back, I don't think it was the wisest thing to do, to be there.
In New Zealand, are you familiar with any sort of protocol that requires, after there's a death in custody, for officers to be separated so that their so that their versions can't be contaminated by mistake or by accident or deliberately?
I can't really recall, to be fair, but I'm sure there would be some type of protocol to, obviously preservation.
It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Because as you've told us today, the first version of events you give,
yes,
it's often the most accurate, and you don't want to have people suggest things to you that contaminate your own version.
I understand that.
And particularly important is in a death in custody when it's going to be such an important investigation for the police.
Yes.
And for the family who's lost somebody.
Yes.
And it's important, isn't it, to maintain public confidence?
Yes.
Are you familiar with a Royal Commission in Australia in 1991 that looked into the deaths of 99 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in custody?
Not too familiar. I have read some excerpts of online information that have related to deaths of Aboriginals in custody.
Following the Royal Commission, there were protocols or general orders in the Northern Territory case that were introduced to make sure that we had good standard of investigation following a death in custody. One of those is the general order in the Northern Territory in the investigation of deaths in custody. Have you, since Kumanjayi's death, seen that?
Not that I can recall, no.
Do you understand has anybody referred you to the principles in that general order?
Possibly, but I guess I would have to see it to know, to be fair.
Sure. Well, it's called the Deaths in Custody and Investigation of Serious and or Fatal Incidents Resulting from Police Contact with the Public. I might ask if you wouldn't mind, if there's no objection, reading that overnight, and I'll ask you a question about it tomorrow. But I take it that you think that if there's an important general order that relates to investigation of deaths in custody and how to maintain evidence, you would want to be directed to it, wouldn't you?
Yes.
As a police officer who was involved.
Yes.
And if you'd been told not to meet with Constable Rolfe or other members of the IRT for a certain period of time,
yes,
until the investigation was completed, you wouldn't have done that, would you?
Well, I hadn't done so, obviously, up until the end of the trial, so yes.
But Sergeant McCormack suggesting to you that there was going to be a debrief that afternoon and then the debrief was moved to Constable Rolfe's house. It must have appeared to you that was sanctioned by Sergeant McCormack.
Yes and no. Constable Rolfe was at the police station the following day when we arrived back from Yuendamu. So he was already at the station talking to people, discussing, I don't know what, but having discussions with everybody at the station, I guess, sergeants, senior sergeants, like he had already been there and he was obviously in the station, so I had no idea what his status was, and I guess in hindsight I could have looked into that to find out whether it would be a wise choice or not to visit that address.
But nobody senior directed you that it wasn't a wise choice. Thank you. Is that a convenient time?
And they also were demonstrating it by their own behaviour.
Yes, Your Honour.
I think he did say earlier in his evidence he thought if there was a debriefing, that would be part of the debriefing, that gives some instruction as to how they conduct themselves in relevant general areas.
I think that would have been very important, Your Honour.
Yes. Thank you for giving your evidence today. I know that you thought and we had planned for it to have been completed today, but are you available to come back tomorrow?
Yes, I am, Your Honour.
Thank you. We'll see you at 9:30.
Thank you.
All stand. Coronial Court now stands.